He is a man who has spent over 5 decades making sure the world never forgets his name. Gene Simmons, the fire-breathing, blood-spitting, platform boot-wearing co-founder of Kiss, has always lived his life at maximum volume. But lately, the headlines surrounding him have taken a different tone. This isn't just about rock and roll anymore. This is about controversy, money, family drama, legal shadows, and a legacy that is being questioned like never before. Whether you love him or can't stand him, you cannot look away. So let's break it all down from the very beginning of where he came from to everything that is happening right now. To understand the Gene Simmons of today, you have to go back to a child named Chaim Witz, born on August 25, 1949, in Haifa, Israel. His mother, Flora Klein, was a Holocaust survivor. She had been forced into labor camps as a teenager in Hungary, watching her family disappear one by one. His father, Yehiel Witz, also escaped Hungary, and the two of them married in 1946, moving to Israel the following year. But the family fractured when Chaim was just 6 years old. His parents divorced, and his father stayed behind in Israel, eventually remarrying and starting over. Chaim never saw him again. Flora raised her son alone in Tyrant Carmel, working grueling factory shifts just to put food on the table. There were nights when their dinner was nothing more than bread and milk. Despite the hardship, or perhaps because of it, young Chaim developed an intense hunger, not just for food, but for something bigger. He discovered American comic books, and even though he couldn't yet read English, he pored over the pages of Spider-Man and Superman with a determination that would define his whole life. He was already speaking Hebrew, Hungarian, and Turkish before he was 10. English would come next, self-taught through sheer willpower and obsession that in 1957, Flora made the most consequential decision of her life. She packed up what little they had, took her 8-year-old son, and immigrated to Queens, New York. They arrived with no money, no connections, and no safety net. Gene, now going by Eugene Klein, was dropped into a world of flush toilets, television, and a school system that didn't quite know what to do with a kid who talked like a foreigner and acted like a survivor. He was bullied. He was mocked for his accent. But he adapted with a ferocity that would later serve him well on the biggest stages in rock history. By 1964, when the Beatles appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show, something irreversible happened inside the teenager who would become Gene Simmons. He watched the crowd go insane. He watched 4 young men command a room of millions. And he decided quietly and completely that he wanted that. He began learning guitar. He formed small bands. He worked odd jobs, butcher shops, delicatessens, translation work, saving every dollar. He even taught 6th grade in Spanish Harlem after earning an associate degree in education. But his heart was never in the classroom. His heart was in the noise. By January 1973, Gene Simmons and his creative partner Paul Stanley had assembled a lineup that would change rock history. Drummer Peter Criss answered a Rolling Stone ad. Guitarist Ace Frehley came through a Village Voice posting. Together, the 4 of them launched Kiss, a band built not just on music but on spectacle. Their first show at a small Queens club called the Coventry drew only a handful of people. But Gene breathed fire that night, and that image lodged itself in every single person who witnessed it. What followed was one of the most extraordinary grassroots rises in music history. Without significant radio play or major industry support, Kiss built their following through relentless touring. They played over 300 shows in a single year. Their 1975 live album became a cultural earthquake, selling millions of copies and rescuing their record label from financial collapse. By the time they were filling stadiums in the mid-1970s, the world had accepted the Demon, the Star Child, the Cat, and the Spaceman as permanent fixtures of American mythology. Gene's persona, the Demon, was rooted in the horror films and comic books that had once been his only escape from poverty. He spat fake blood. He breathed real fire. He wore platform boots that made him tower over everything. And off stage, he cultivated an image that was just as extreme. He documented his sexual encounters with Polaroid photographs, keeping a collection he would later boast numbered in the thousands. Bandmates, guests, and fellow musicians were shown these photos. Some were appalled. Some were amused. Gene seemed to treat the whole enterprise as just another performance, another way of proving to the world, and perhaps to himself, that the boy who once had nothing was now a man who had everything. But empires develop cracks, and Kiss was no exception. By the late 1970s, internal tensions were tearing at the band's original lineup. Peter Criss's substance struggles made him unpredictable on stage. There were nights when he simply stopped playing mid-set. Ace Frehley's own issues with alcohol created their own friction. When the original four finally parted ways, it wasn't just a business decision, it was the end of a chapter that had shaped a generation. The band went through reinventions. They removed their iconic makeup in 1983, betting their entire image on a rawer, more aggressive sound, and won. They came back together for a massive reunion in 1996 that broke touring records. They launched merchandise empires that stamped the KISS logo onto everything from pinball machines to coffins, generating well over $1 billion in branded sales. Whatever you thought of Gene Simmons the man, you could not deny what he had built. KISS had become less of a band and more of an institution. Yet even as the business grew, the personal story grew more complicated. Gene's relationship with actress and model Shannon Tweed stretched over nearly 3 decades before he finally agreed to marry her in 2011. They had met at the Playboy Mansion in 1983. They built a family together. Their son Nick was born in 1989, daughter Sophie in 1992. But Gene resisted marriage with the kind of stubborn theatricality you might expect from a man who had made a career out of excess. He quoted Groucho Marx on the subject. He gave interviews dismissing the institution entirely. Shannon endured it all, until she didn't. The breaking point came publicly, with cameras rolling, during their long-running A&E reality series. When Shannon discovered the full scope of Gene's history, the Polaroids, the parade of encounters documented over decades, she burned that collection on air. It was one of the most startling moments in reality television history. Not because of the fire, but because of what it represented, a woman finally drawing a line, and a man who had spent his whole life avoiding accountability, finally standing in front of it. Gene proposed to Shannon in 2011 in Boise, Idaho. They married on October 1st of that year, with their children standing beside them. For a man who had once called marriage a trap, it was a remarkably tender moment. Whether it was genuine transformation or simply a man accepting the inevitable, only those closest to him truly know. Here is where things get uncomfortable, and where the latest headlines are coming from. In 2024, Gene Simmons appeared as a guest on Dancing with the Stars, and his comments about the female dancers drew widespread criticism. Rather than commenting on the performances, he repeatedly focused on the physical appearance of the women involved. A remark about one dancer fogging up his glasses went viral almost immediately, and not in a flattering way. Social media erupted. Critics called his comments tone-deaf and inappropriate. ABC faced calls to address what had happened on their broadcast. Gene, true to form, doubled down in a follow-up interview, saying he stood behind every word he had said. For many observers, it was a moment that crystallized a pattern. A man who grew up believing that charm and boldness could get away with anything, still operating by that same playbook in a world that had moved on. That same troubling pattern runs through earlier chapters too. In 2010, a makeup artist for ESPN filed a lawsuit against Simmons, alleging inappropriate physical behavior during a sports broadcast appearance. Gene denied the allegations vigorously and filed a countersuit. The case was settled. In 2016, and again in 2017, workers at his Rock and Brews restaurant chain made additional allegations of unwanted physical contact. Those cases were also resolved outside of court. Gene consistently dismissed these claims as baseless. But the accumulation of complaints, spread across years and different contexts, painted a picture that his public defenders found increasingly difficult to excuse. Then came the merchandise controversy of 2025. Gene launched an experience package for his solo tour, priced at over $1,200 on top of the ticket cost, which promised fans the chance to act as his personal roadie for a day, attend soundcheck, eat backstage, and receive a signed bass guitar. The backlash was fierce. Critics called it a shameless money grab from a man already worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Defenders argued that fans were adults capable of deciding how to spend their money, and pointed out the packages sold out. The debate around it was about more than just a price point. It tapped into a broader frustration with celebrity culture, the sense that the distance between the rich and famous and everyone else had become so enormous that even the experience of being a fan now required wealth most people don't have. The solo tour itself hit turbulence. By late March 2025, several tour dates had been canceled due to low ticket sales. For a man who had once headlined stadiums with KISS, the scaled-back solo shows and the cancellations felt like a significant signal. Gene insisted the smaller setup was actually easier and more enjoyable. But fans who had paid premium prices for a premium experience felt let down, and some felt that the focus on profit had overshadowed the music that made them care about Gene Simmons in the first place. Not all of the recent headlines have been negative. When Gene lost his mother, Flora Klein, in December 2018 at the age of 93, the response from the public offered a glimpse of the man beneath the demon makeup. Flora had survived unimaginable horrors: Nazi labor camps, the loss of her own mother to a gas chamber, immigration to a new country with nothing, and she had done it all while raising a son who would grow up to become one of the most recognizable figures in rock history. Gene's tribute to her on social media was openly emotional. He called her his moral compass. He urged people to cherish their parents while they still could. Paul Stanley called Flora fiercely loving. Shannon called her the best grandmother. For a moment, the armor came off entirely. His son Nick's journey has been its own complicated story. In 2010, Nick's comic book series Incarnate faced serious accusations of plagiarism, with fans producing detailed side-by-side comparisons showing panels that appeared to be directly copied from the Japanese manga series Bleach. The publisher pulled the book. Nick apologized, framing the similarities as unintentional homage. Gene defended his son publicly. But the incident followed Nick into the reality show Years and Beyond, leaving a mark on his creative reputation that has been difficult to shake. It was a reminder that the name Simmons carries enormous weight, and that the expectations that come with that name can be a burden as much as a privilege. Gene's handling of social and political topics has also made news. For years, he was vocal in his criticism of Donald Trump, calling him out in strong terms after January 6, 2021, comparing the political atmosphere to something dark and creeping. Which is why the announcement in August 2025 that Kiss would receive the Kennedy Center honors under the Trump administration created a firestorm of confusion and accusation. The internet did what the internet does. Memes multiplied, accusations of hypocrisy flooded every platform, and fans demanded an explanation. Gene said nothing publicly. In some ways, that silence said more than any statement could have. And then there was the moment in 2025 when Gene broke down on CBS Mornings after the death of Ozzy Osbourne. Whatever complicated feelings fans have about Gene Simmons the businessman, Gene Simmons the self-promoter, Gene Simmons the man who too often said the wrong thing in the wrong room, what they saw in that interview was grief, plain and honest. He talked about opening for Black Sabbath in the early days of Kiss. He described Ozzy as a genuinely free soul. He revealed that Kiss had once turned down a full tour with Black Sabbath in the 1970s specifically because of the drug culture surrounding the band, a detail that surprised even longtime fans. In losing Ozzy, something of the original world that had created Gene Simmons was also passing away, and for once, he let people see that it mattered to him.